It's almost about that time. Right about now.
Right about now. Funk, bunk, 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 soul brother.
I'm just fascinated. I want to kind of get into your origin story, like the Taylor Lorenz origin story, because, I mean, you're young compared to me, that's for sure. And you've done so much in your career so far. And I feel like your career kind of mirrors kind of what journalists are doing right now. Like it's an interesting, or you're actually a little bit of a harbinger, I think, of things to come more. But still, like, I just want to track your career. Because you're like a generation younger than me, so
I'm a
you
millennial.
You're a millennial, right? And I'm a Gen Xer, so like my career, and I've talked a lot about it on this show, was like, you know, you get an editorial assistant a job at a magazine at Condé Nast, and then you kind of work your way up, and it's so not that anymore. And so like sometimes when I am giving younger people advice, I'm just like, don't listen to my career is like not replicable. Yours is though. But anyway, but you kind of started off like a traditional way. Like you started off at traditional magazines, not what you were reporting on, but maybe like, how'd you get into it? Like, how'd you get into it?
No, I was working at a call center.
Oh, really? Okay, tell me that. Yeah.
And I was working retail
Okay.
and doing deliveries. And, you know, I graduated, it was the recession. So there was no jobs, basically. This was back in 2009. And so I was one of my temp jobs, because I was just temping also to make ends meet in New York. This girl at my temp job introduced me to Tumblr.
Oh,
And that got me into blogging. And so I started, I had no experience, in journalism at all. And then I started blogging, and I just started writing about the things that I cared about. At that time, I felt like the mainstream media was really, really covering the internet in a really stupid and out of touch way. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, I'm going to write about the internet, but like from the perspective of somebody that actually like uses it, and cover it, you know, with, I think the like seriousness that it deserves, I guess. And also I ran a bunch of like meme page Tumblrs and stuff like that, and these single serving Tumblrs. So I just started to get a lot of attention online. I became popular online. I became like an internet personality and all.
Yeah, so we're talking about 2008, 2009 here, because you're saying the recession, right? So in 2008, I think I mentioned this to you, I was working at a website called break.com, which was, do you remember Break?
Of course, yeah.
So like I was their editorial director. I mean, it was such a crazy transition for me, because I went from being, you know, like a traditional magazine guy to a .com guy. So when you're talking about the internet, I'm trying to think of internet culture in 2008. That's even pre-YouTube, right? Like,
no, YouTube actually. So I had a bunch of friends that were like very early YouTubers.
Okay.
It was Tumblr. It was blog culture. It was really big. Yeah, it wasn't like the social web didn't kick off, but the year, I mean, in 2009 is when Facebook launched Pages.
Right.
So you started to see this like a lot more brands experimenting with the internet. Every single media company was on Tumblr, because when I started to get popular on Tumblr, like media people started following me. And I remember like the official like NPR Tumblr and the official Newsweek, because they had a Tumblr, like followed me and stuff. So it was, you know, you couldn't really do anything as a blogger except sort of leverage your success as a blogger, like to get a media job. Like that was sort of like, there wasn't like a path. You couldn't like monetize enough on your blog. Some people I knew in that era of Tumblr ended up starting like agencies and doing like, because I did brand social media too for a while. Like basically, so I blew up on Tumblr. I got a job at an ad agency because they were like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm a temp and I'm working retail." And,
by the way, I started my career in magazine journalism as a temp as well. Like I was a temp at a magazine as their receptionist, and that's how I got my job. So we have like, I mean, you did it in a more creative way. I was
that's
just
a much cooler temp job than I ever
but
had.
I just happened to be like answering phones. I mean, it was a temp job. I wasn't even trying to work at magazines. It was just a random thing that happened to be a magazine I was working for, and it wasn't a cool magazine either. It was Child magazine. But anyway, so this is like a lesson I always want to teach people, is like, you never know like what your job is going to lead to, even if you're doing some crappy temp job, right? Like,
well, none
if
of
you
my
hadn't met
temp
that person,
if I hadn't met Kelly, I wouldn't
would
be
have
there.
gone to the Tumblr, and then the Tumblr like blew up.
Yeah.
And so you were obviously writing about what you loved or what you were interested in, right? Like that was
I was really frustrated by, as somebody that sort of immediately found community on Tumblr, and like, I mean, it was like day and night when I started to like meet people through the internet, because I grew up in Connecticut and in New York, and it was sort of like I never really found my people until Tumblr, and then I just found all of my closest friends basically like through blogging. And but the way that like the New York Times and stuff was writing about it was so condescending, and they would be so dismissive, especially of women. And so
that surprises me. The New York Times would be dismissive of women, because I feel like they're so, well, I don't know, maybe that
they're so misogynistic.
You think
they're
so?
horrible. Yes. They constantly, as I've written many times, feed misogynistic hate campaigns against women. This is something that they still do, and were even doing, back in the day.
Okay.
I wrote about this in my book, actually, about mommy bloggers and the insane biased media coverage that mommy bloggers received. These were women that were very feminist and really sort of using blogging to challenge the patriarchy, normalize things like, struggling to breastfeed, or like hating your husband or whatever. And like the traditional media just like savaged them and accused them of being like, using their children, just like really fucked up stuff that was not true.
Well, so you were able to leverage the success that you had on Tumblr to start working. And like you said, at that time you couldn't like start a Substack, right, and make your own money. Like there
was no monetization layer to the internet. Yeah, and there was no money in any of it. Even my friends that were YouTubers at that time, like you weren't doing any of that to make money. It hadn't really all been monetized yet.
And even the people who were working for me at Break, I mean, they all wanted to be. Now I lived in LA. This was in LA, so they all wanted to be screenwriters. They were just using because we had blogs at Break to get like a job at a screen, like we did the guy who wrote Shit My Dad Says was one of my first hires. And he started at Break, and then he wrote Shit My Dad Says when Twitter started kind of becoming a thing, and then he left, of course, because how could I hold on to him? Now he's a showrunner at what's that show about the teachers? Oh my God, this is embarrassing. I have to edit this part.
Abbott Elementary?
Yeah, now he's the showrunner of Abbott Elementary.
Oh, cool.
So
it's been
quite a trajectory for this guy. But the point is that like nobody ever wanted to just be a blogger. Like, or maybe they did, but they couldn't make money doing it.
People would have loved to do. I mean, I would have loved to be independent. I never wanted to work in traditional media at all. I was always very like anti that route, but it was like there was nowhere really to work. So first I started to do social media for brands. So I got a job at what was then like Adweek, Ad Age, like agency of the year. It was this like hot ad agency that was starting this social media team, and I was running social media for Verizon. And working on a bunch of tech stuff and phone launches and working with tech bloggers and like doing social strategy for them and a bunch of other brands. And then I was blogging on the side. And then in 2012, I got hired at the Daily Mail as their first social media person, because they didn't have they didn't even have like a Facebook page set up or anything. And so I was hired initially just to sort of like set up a US Facebook page for them. And then I sort of like took over, and I became the youngest woman in senior management at that company. I was like promoted, because like it was so easy to get promoted back then if you like knew anything about the internet. Right. And so then I ran like a team of like a dozen social media editors, and I kept working in social media. I basically was in like really senior jobs in news or like for media companies, running social media and doing business development online, and then blogging on the side. And then in 2017, I switched to writing full time. And
so did you always know that you wanted to be a writer, or is that something that you just gravitated toward because you were good at it and because you enjoyed doing that?
I don't think I'm particularly good at writing, actually.
You're good at it.
It's fun. I'm passable. No, definitely not. Like I mean, I've done a lot of like video and multimedia stuff. I have multiple Snapchat shows over the years. I had a Facebook show. I've like made a lot of different types of content. I mostly was making content for social, and social requires like just a mix of formats, I guess. Like I was producing live streams for a while for The Hill, like a political media company. So it's kind of been a mix. The reason I switched to writing was because after Charlottesville, so I covered the 2016 election and then the first year of the Trump presidency. I was at The Hill. I was like senior director of emerging platforms or something and a senior editor there. And I was managing people. I was managing some video people and social people. And I felt like nobody was listening to me about the internet, no matter how many articles I wrote. And I was breaking a lot of news. People in journalism were so like up their own ass for like they wouldn't take you seriously until you were like a full-time writer. They would always put like these qualifiers in front of my name that I actually don't think exists anymore. But like 8 years ago, it was like I was looking back at what people were calling me, but they were like social media personality or like social media gadfly. Literally, they like called me that in an article. And they just couldn't understand the concept of a reporter that like was not reporting in like traditional articles. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to suck it up and take the biggest pay cut of my life and go back to making an entry level salary just to like have the job title reporter, because it seems like traditional media people, like that's the only thing they care about.
You do a lot. See, like just that move right there is pretty ballsy and like a lot of people would just stick with like the traditional, like just take the money, right, and like get the cool title or whatever, or not the title you didn't love or whatever. Like take, but you like throughout your career, there's a lot of like you kind of like saying F this, I'm gonna do it the way I want to do it and the way that I think is fair. Where do you think that comes from? I mean, I don't know if that's a good characterization. It seems like you're a bit of a provocateur in that way. I mean, you don't kind of take shit. Where do you think that comes from?
I will quit any job immediately if
it's not the right. You will quit this podcast if it doesn't go well. Like you're like
no, but I just think it's like life is short, and like I mean, you're talking about earlier, like speaking to young people. Like I mean, again, I think graduating into the recession and just like seeing so many people that I knew, like their parents lost so much, or they were really struggling, and like. I mean, I was struggling economically, obviously, after college myself, just to like pay rent, and just like I just think. You can't ever trust a company ever. I will never have loyalty ever in my life to any company. It's delusional. Like even the companies that I loved working for, like I know that they would lay me off tomorrow if it was in the cards for the business. And like, and I've written business plans. Like I understand the business side of things. I've had to fire people when I was a senior manager. Like it sucks. So I just feel like you have to put yourself first always, and you have to do whatever you want. And it's like, you know, I don't know. I've always thought too, like I'm pretty good at internet stuff and like marketing, and I have a lot of experience sort of in and out of digital marketing and all this stuff over the years. And I just feel like I have enough skills that like my plan was when I took that reporting job was to do it for 1 year, and I had enough savings. I moved in with a bunch of friends in Crown Heights, and I was like, all right, I'm going to make literally nothing for a year, but I'm going to have this like title of reporter on my resume, and like that's going to get these like media people to take me seriously. And if it doesn't happen in a year, then I'll just go back to like, you know, running social media campaigns for people, and it'll be fine.
Right.
And I told actually my boss when they hired me, because I wanted them to pay me a lot more and they wouldn't, and I was like, you know what, all right, I'll take this low salary, but just so you know, the first person that offers me more money, I'm going to quit, and like I don't want to hear from you, like, oh, you're not loyal, da 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 da. And so, yes, that happened after 6 months. The Atlantic came and offered me a little bit more money. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. So I was only at the Daily Beast, even though I love Noah Shackman, who hired me for 6 months as a reporter. And then I got promoted. I went to the Atlantic, and then the New York Times recruited me. And then.
So all this time you were writing about social media, you were writing about social media influencers, right? That was your beat. That was definitely your beat.
Yeah.
And you were obviously, what made you so successful, because you had a really good run there. I mean, these are top tier publications, the Atlantic, New York Times, Washington Post. We haven't talked about that yet. Like, what do you think it was that got you all those great positions?
I think they were lucky to have me working for them, if I'm being honest. They don't have anybody covering my beat now. Like these are places that have struggled to cover online culture for so many years. I think Joe Bernstein is really good at the Times, and, you know, like some people on the business desk that like dabble, but they don't break news. They're never leaving, like they're not leading the stories. They're not like, you know, and so I felt like I it would be good for me to like get those places on my resume again so that these like credentialist people would take it seriously, because there's unfortunately this group of people that's like they're really going to be gone soon, but they do have like a modicum of power now, and they care about things like the New York Times or whatever. And so I feel like it was just like good to have it on my resume, I guess.
Yeah. So it was in a way, it was more of a resume building exercise than like you wanting to be like a seriously like mainstream journalist.
I've never wanted to be a mainstream reporter in my life, and that's never been my goal. That's my goal is always to have my own platform, always. Right. And I've never, I mean, I don't even put my employers in my bio ever. Like I've never used a work email address ever. I've only ever used my, like, I just feel like I don't mind doing things for the companies, but again, it just goes back to like what I think every young person needs to know, that these companies would literally knife you tomorrow if it saved them $1. Like it's just business. It's not any indictment on anything. So I just don't, I just sort of feel like if you go into it clear-eyed, and for me with the New York Times, especially, like I was sort of hesitant, and I had actually turned them down. They had tried to recruit me previously and they weren't giving me the job title I want. So I turned them down, and then I was like, all right, I'll go to the New York Times this time, but it has to like, they have to give me the right sort of, like it had to be the right job. And I think what I found to be very frustrating there, and just legacy media general, is like I had to quit all of my outside projects, and you're making a huge sacrifice. And I'm glad I did it for a few years, but it's at some point that trade-off doesn't, it starts to get lopsided. And
do you think it helps you now to have all those things though on your resume? Like that was a
I'm
good
glad I
bet
did it
that you
because
made?
because people just like, I don't need it personally to get stories ever. Like it doesn't really help because the people that I cover don't care about that stuff. They're much more likely to talk to me because I'm not part of the mainstream media. Most of them have a very hostile view of the media, which I totally get because I have that too. But it's helped me like my book deal. You know what I mean? Like it says on like Simon and Schuster, I'm sure like they put like New York Times, Washington Post, Atlantic, whatever, so I think that stuff helps for other sort of old school institutions.
Yeah, that's interesting because I'm, like, again, I'm a generation older than you. And when I'm trying to market myself, like, I'm like, do I put that I've written for the New York Times? Like, it doesn't matter. First of all, I haven't written for the New York Times in like 10 years, whatever. But
yeah, but
like,
it doesn't
just
matter.
to put the New York Times in there.
Yes.
But the thing is, but then it's like, I feel like we're also sending the message to people listening to this is like, all that shit kind of doesn't matter. And that those are kind of dinosaurs that are going away. So it's like, I sort of don't know when the time is that you don't need to write for those magazines and newspapers anymore, because it doesn't really matter, right? If you want to do your own thing. Like if somebody were to ask you, a young person were to ask you, do you think I should like get some credentials working for
No, that would be the worst thing that you could do. No.
Okay.
I think the time to get, I think it's like, I'm glad that I did what I did when I did. I would not do it again.
Okay.
And I mean, there's a reason I just quit my traditional media job. Like I just don't, I think we've like really crossed that threshold to the point where, I mean, it's so funny. I was at this Substack event last night, and like we were just talking, me and some other Substackers that have been profiled in the New York Times, and how it did like nothing for them. And
different audiences.
I think it's just a different, and again, that doesn't, like, I have a lot of amazing friends at the New York Times. I think the Times does incredible work in certain areas. Like, I think it's, if you want to be a journalist forever and sort of like have a stable reporting job, like it's a very stable place in ways that other places aren't. I'm glad that I worked there. I loved my editor. I would die for my editor there. She was amazing. But I just think,
shout out, name check.
Pui Wing Tam. She's amazing.
Oh,
She's
cool.
a genius. And my editor at the Washington Post, Mark Seibel, who
What
was
do you like so
the
much
best
about
editor I
them?
ever
Mark
had.
Seibel's name I totally recognize.
Every editor that I've ever had, I think I would like kill people for, because like I love my editors so much, and
Why do you love them?
bond
Because they
to
made
them.
you so.
Because they're wonderful. Like I've just had the privilege of working for people that give me like very helpful feedback, and I think as a blogger and somebody that spent most of my career writing for myself, like you never get feedback other than from your audience. So having someone like thoughtfully read something and like critique it is so valuable.
So I know, and it's hard, unfortunately, when you leave like a mainstream publication that has the budget to have like editors, right? Then you're kind of editing yourself, which is tricky.
I'm just hitting up my old editor from Washington Post all the time.
You really? Can you just read this
He's
really
retired,
quick?
but I'm like, Mark, what do you think of this?
I know. Whenever you have a really good editor, it's like you just don't want to let that person go. I haven't had that many great, and of course I edit. Do you edit now as well?
Yeah, I mean, I have edited, and I
Yeah.
sometimes edit
You
freelance
like it?
now on the side.
I find it challenging, but I do. I probably edit more than I write these, like sometimes. But well, actually, it depends where I am in my career. Right now, I'm writing more than I edit. But yeah, it's easy. Being a good editor is tricky because you have to kind of meet the writer where they are. You have to make the writer feel like they, like you have to don't like destroy what they're doing, but also bring out their best. And I don't know. It's a challenging. And if you can find an editor that knows how to who understands you and can make your writing better just by a few tweaks or giving you a few suggestions, it's gold.
Yeah.
It's really great.
So shout out to the New York Times editors.
Yeah, just not so much the New York Times itself. I'm almost about to. I'm considering canceling my New York Times subscription. Something that I never thought, the words that I never would think of uttering. And the only reason I don't is because I feel like I have to know kind of what's happening in the New York Times, but I can't stand most of the coverage, and I get very, very frustrated by the New York Times.
It's gone in a weird bend. I mean, they've always published a lot of garbage. It's everywhere, though. I mean, there's no website. I used to write. I mean, I came up in millennial digital media, and some of the stuff that is
What's that, BuzzFeed?
I wrote for
millennial?
BuzzFeed. I wrote for Mike.com, if you
Right.
knew them, the
know if I
millennial
know Mike.
news. Just all of those. Mashable. I mean,
Mashable,
I
I
love
remember,
those
yeah.
places,
All
the
the
Daily
Gawker
Dot.
stuff.
They gave
Yeah.
me my start. I love all of them. Now I write sometimes for Passion Fruit, which is actually owned by the Daily Dot, which is a website for content creators. So they're great. I mean, digital media has just been so gutted. It just everywhere I ever wanted to work, like BuzzFeed and Vice and stuff, they don't even exist anymore.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. What do you think they didn't understand about you? They kept slighting you or just not taking you seriously,
Ooh.
or what do you think they got wrong? What did they get wrong about what you were doing?
Who are you talking
Was it
about?
just the traditional
Legacy
people you
media?
work?
I
Yeah,
don't think
legacy
they
media.
got. I mean, I was treated really well. I can't complain because I've had a very good work environment. I think my tension is not with anybody that I've ever worked with. Pui Wing always understood my stories and was amazing and would let me write about Mr. Beast or whoever,
Yeah.
it's more just from a management perspective. I think the bosses at a lot of these old school news organizations don't actually respect the internet. They don't actually understand that it's our default reality. And so they sort of just trivialize it a lot and they don't take it seriously. And they aren't willing to do the things that you need to do to break good stories. If you really want to cover the influencer world, you need to realize that you are going to be the subject of 24/7 backlash because you're covering people that are their own media companies. And so you're
Yeah.
kind of it's
They have
being a
bigger
media reporter
following
on
maybe than even the
steroids.
publication that wrote about him. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, but then it's also people with millions of parasocial followers. So you write slightly critically about Jake Paul, about Mr. Beast, about a lot
Yeah.
of these creators that I've covered the industry very critically. You are dealing with a level of craziness that
Yeah.
I think a lot of traditional news orgs aren't used to dealing with, and especially the way that my work has been politicized as the far right has really sought to sort of capture online influence. It's been this really aggressive, I've just had to deal with a lot. And I think news organizations aren't prepared to deal with that.
Do you think that's why they shy away from it, or is it because they feel well, first of all, they don't understand it because a lot of people making decisions are probably too old, right? They just haven't been steeped in that. I don't want to sound ageist here. Maybe they do understand. I understand it, and I'm
My
old.
editor was 72 years old, and I don't think age is the issue because Mark Seibel is the most with it person that he
Right.
just knows a good story. He doesn't have to know who it's he just was phenomenal. I don't think it's an age thing. I think it's a mindset thing. I think it's complete cowardice. Honestly, I think they are scared to make Republicans mad. So they're scared to
Yeah.
make anybody mad. It's a place of fear. I think they're scared to take risks. I think they again, because they don't understand the internet as the default reality, they still think it's this place you can kind of dip into or this just
Yeah,
shows
it's
in the
fashion. Yeah.
in the way they like approach social media too, even with their own reporters. Like they don't understand, like we live our lives online now. The internet is our life. Like, you know, so I mean, this is why I became a columnist instead of a reporter too when I joined the Post, because I was like, I need to be able to say opinions, like, because I'm a opinionated person online and I don't want to, you know, just like stay in these jobs where like, because you're a reporter, you can never express an opinion ever online when the internet is like how we live our life. That would just be like, oh, you're never allowed to express an opinion anywhere you go. It's like, that's stupid. That's also just,
well, it seems that there has to be like two roles, right? There's the people, and I don't even know if there's a way to report the objective truth anymore.
There is no such thing.
Yeah.
I would argue.
You would
like,
argue?
I
or
don't
like
think
the
it's
old days of like the New York, you know, the old days of like the New York Times where it was like they were giving you the who, what, where, when's, like it was like the facts, right? But I feel like
no, it wasn't though. It was always. I mean, go read their coverage of AIDS or like the HIV.
Right.
Like they're so full of shit. They're so biased in so many ways. This is my qualms with the media that like I would blog about like 15 years ago. But like,
right.
I mean, of course, there's objective fact, I guess, and like reality, right? Like there is fact and fiction, and I think that we should make our stories accurate and factual and truthful. That of course. But there's no like this concept of like objectivity, I think is delusional because we're all human beings and no human being is, there's not like one universal, like whatever. Again, it just goes back to being fair. Is your story fair?
Yeah. But do you think like, for example, the stories that are on like the front page of the New York Times, the way those are reported, those can't have as much opinion as say like the columnists have.
They have so much opinion. They put like people like David Leonhardt, who just literally is an opinion columnist, but somehow writes for news and constantly pushes crazy, dangerous health misinformation on the news side of the paper. Like,
right.
All
so
of these places are broken.
Any of these people, yeah, they're so broken.
No, they're so full of shit when they like come out and they're like, oh, and we stand for XYZ. It's like, no. Please look at your product. That is not, whatever delusions you have, like it's just not happening. And I really wish that all of legacy media would just acknowledge that reality and acknowledge that the world that they thought that they were going to operate in forever, it's dead. It's gone. It's no normal person lives in that world anymore unless you like, you know, are like a 45-year-old like editor, I guess, living, you know, some life where you're like you're just in that like legacy bubble, it's a bubble.
Wearing your tweed jacket and listening to the. I mean, it's funny because a lot of those publications, they just have no really impact anymore as much as they used to. Like even 10 years ago, and I think it's hard to give up that power, right? Like they had so much power at one time, and they just don't anymore.
I think we saw that with this election.
Yeah, I'm very excited to talk about the election But I want to stay on your story for a minute because now we're getting to the good part. Like, so you're at Washington Post, you leave Washington Post. I won't get into that unless you want to. I think there was
I left. Well, there was no controversy. I let Mark, my editor, retired. My editor, who was my reason for being there, retired, and I wanted to go independent. I mean, my goal is always to be going independent, but I'm not. Yeah, it was like just seemed like the right time, and I had also like wanted to work with Drew. Drew was my main reporting partner. We got split up when Mark left, and when Mark left too, the entire senior leadership of the Washington Post left, like Sally, the editor-in-chief that hired me, all these other people. So no one I like went to the Post to work with was there anymore, and I wanted to go independent. And I thought, okay, I had this like month-long vacation plan, so I was like, I don't want to leave, you know, before my vacation. So I was like, let me take this summer. It took quite a long time to like incorporate my brand, like make it all, get the branding in order, get everything. So I started sending my newsletter again I soft launched it in June. And that's when I posted about leaving, although no one seemed to care then. I just was like, I can't go on without Mark. And I sent my newsletter all throughout June, and then I waited until I had sort of taken my vacation, and then came back to like officially rebrand it. But I was really annoyed at the media coverage because classic every single thing I do is like, oh, yes, Taylor did that. But actually, the real reason she did this is because she posted something on Instagram 3 months ago. And so that's why she's quitting. Because I said Joe Biden is a war criminal, as if I haven't said Joe Biden is a war criminal like 500 times. Like I say that all the time. That's not a controversy.
Right. About a lot.
He is a war criminal. All of our leaders are war criminals. This is America. Like, I mean, some of the stuff that I used to say online is like a lot more extreme than that. So,
Right.
and I can say whatever I want. Like, where does this idea come that this is part of why I wanted to become a columnist, is because
Right. You didn't want to be under the thumb of billionaires, as you put on.
I wanted to express opinions, and I didn't, and that's why I chose not to join as a reporter. But yeah, my decision to go independent was completely based on Mark leaving, and I just not having him around. And to be honest, just like, I just didn't feel like I was getting very much. Like, I had to say no. There was a couple opportunities this fall that I would have had to turn down, and I didn't want to turn those down. So
Right.
I just was like, okay, this doesn't seem to be worth it. And maybe if there was like another editor that came in, it would have been different. But like Mark was just so wonderful, and I think will never be replaced. So,
But not only did you leave, but you could have gone from the Washington Post to another.
other news places
legacy.
tried to recruit me. I just don't want to do that. Like, I mean, over the summer, like right when Mark left and I relaunched my newsletter, like I was like also initially thinking about being a formal contributor at a couple places, and because I was like, oh, I'm going to leave. And I was like, I definitely don't want to do a full-time job. Also because I have like 4 different jobs. The Washington Post was just one job.
Right.
And so I was like, I'll be a contributor. And then the more I talked, it just was like, this doesn't make sense. I'm happy to freelance. Like, I love to freelance. I'm totally down to freelance for places, but I want complete control over like what I do and my schedule. And I don't want to have to worry about missing an 8 a.m. status meeting, or if I get invited to a cool event, like I want to be able to go, you know?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. No, I gave up I don't know as willingly as you, but I gave up the full-time mainstream thing too. Let me ask you about your big new venture. And did you know when you were leaving and going to be on your own that you were going to start User Mag, or did that come kind of like later?
So like I said, I relaunched my newsletter. Like when Mark left, I was like really going through it online. I posted very publicly, like, I can't go on in my job without Mark. Like, what am I going to do? Da, 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 da. And so like, I think because I was posting about it so publicly and being kind of open about like, what should I do? Like a lot of people reached out, and a lot of independent journalists, like I talked to them, and one thing that everyone said is like, you should make like a brand. Like, don't just make it Taylor Lorenz's newsletter, because you should have something to kind of make like a product out of.
Yeah.
So,
why do you think that is? That's interesting. So, because I think of like, like the Free Press, right? That's like Barry Weiss's thing, or or what's the conservative guy from who's gay, who had the Daily, anyway, whatever.
The Daily Wire.
It's not the Daily Wire. It's what's his name? He's like on the center conservative. He's gay. He's kind of an older guy. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
There's a lot of them.
Well,
on the right, they all have millions of dollars.
Yeah, exactly. But why do you think that they say don't do the Taylor Lorenz thing? Like, because it's like shouldn't it be your personal brand? Because your
it
personal
is my brand. It is like when it comes in your newsletter, like in the inbox, it says like Taylor Lorenz for User Magazine. I think because people were saying like people won't take it seriously. And when you go to like an event or something, like you want to have like a brand name. And also if you ever take on contributors, or if it's ever not you, like it's just an easier, seamless thing. Like if you get readers in the habit of sort of understanding it as a brand, it's just better for brand opportunities, for expansion, and for sort of just, I guess, people's remembering it. So
User Mag came. So when people told you that maybe have a name of your company.
I registered User Mag in June. And I just came up with the name because I cover tech from the user side, and I have my podcast is called Power User.
Right. So user is like your word.
Yeah, because I cover tech from the user. I love
I like it.
user side.
It makes sense. Makes sense.
I had a column called User Feedback. So
right. And when you log in, or one of the first things you see, and I've noticed this because I've been reading your articles, says the first thing it says is the media landscape is broken. User Mag was founded on the belief that journalists should not have to work under the thumb of billionaires who don't have democracy's interest at heart. That's pretty. I mean, it kind of echoes what we've been talking about for the last 30 minutes. But Did you think twice about writing? Like, tell me like why that
I
was
don't
such an
think,
important thing.
I think that's something that I've always said. I don't think that billionaires should be controlling our media climate. I don't think billionaires should exist, period, because I think it's like
There's not enough.
allowing people to amass a level of wealth that's really problematic. But yeah, I mean, I think one thing that really affected me was this sort of like downfall of digital media and the promise of digital media in the 2010s that I think a lot of myself, like me and other millennials, like we all sort of came up in that era being like, wow, look at these amazing digital media places that are like holding these big places accountable. And then once that went away, it's like now we just have this increasingly consolidated legacy media landscape that's dominated by billionaire controlled media. I think that's
Right.
really concerning. Even if the billionaire is pretty hands off, I think, again, it's just not, even the most benevolent billionaire is still a billionaire. And I would love to see a more independent media ecosystem that's not driven by rich people. Because
Right.
ultimately, those places cater to rich people. Like, they cater to like, that's the audience for like the Wall Street Journal or whatever, right? Like they're not writing for like the average working Americans. Like they're writing for like upper middle class, like wealthy people. And that comes through in their coverage. I mean, look at like the coverage of the back to work stuff in places like the Journal or the Times or whatever. It's like they cover it from this like very like business focused point of view, not from a worker's point of view. They don't ever center like labor in any of their stories. And so
Yeah.
one thing with User Mag is I'm a huge believer in independent media. So I wanted to
Right.
like draw that distinction.
Let me just linger on this one thing that you said about like the millennials had this sort of like we're fed this kind of dream in a way, and I kind of lived through this dream where like all these digital publications, which were like so exciting in the beginning, like the Gawkers and the BuzzFeeds and all the daily I don't know whatever I was going to say the Daily Call, but not the Daily Call. All these different things, they're all gone now. A lot of them are gone. Why do you think that because I have my theories about why those things haven't really made it, haven't lived, haven't existed, haven't continued to exist, and didn't like make as much of an impact as we thought they were. But why do you think that they didn't? Is it because like greed? I mean, what
The
is it?
business model was never going to work. Like, I mean, they were all venture backed. And I think that's, again, goes back to billionaire controlled media. Like when you have venture capitalists funding the media environment, they're expecting a level of scale and return that is pretty impossible and super antithetical to like any sort of long-term sustainable like journalism business.
Right.
So you had these people chasing scale at all costs. They also completely misunderstood the like actual digital media revolution, which I wrote in my book. Like they really missed the entire like content creator industry, and they really didn't take it seriously, especially people in Silicon Valley. They did not take it seriously at all. And instead they were funding these things that were like kind of just mimicking legacy media, but like for the internet. And they were super progressive in some ways, but like the business model wasn't significantly different. Like they were still relying on ad dollars basically to monetize.
Right. I
And
mean, I got laid off from a few of those jobs, like because they would bring me in to start their digital thing. Like for example, I got a job at the Game Show Network as their head of digital, but they didn't know how to like they weren't they didn't know how to monetize that. It was always the issue. It's happened to me over and over again. They don't they know they have to be in the space, but they're not set up to or they just don't have the real desire to monetize.
no, I mean, I have friends, like some of the best journalists I know, just because of the times that we're in, like have been laid off so many times,
Yeah.
like 4 or 5 times.
I had never been laid off in my life until 10 years ago, and now I've been laid off about 5 times.
That's
Yeah.
like a minimum. It's crazy. Like, I mean, it's actually shocking. One of my friends is like, we're calling her the Grim Reaper for a while because she was like, every digital media place she was getting, she had a run where it was like, I think it was like 5 in a row, but it was just same thing of what you're saying. It was just like, or the owner switched, like Refinery 29 sold and then changed. It just like, it's really sad. And that's why I think it's so important for young journalists to put themselves first and prioritize building a direct relationship with their audience.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I think this is all going. So you have started User Mag, and right now, are you the only contributor to User Mag?
I
Or
am. Although I
you are?
have guest posts, like Adam Alexic, I'm going to pronounce his last name. He's Etymology Nerd on Substack.
Okay.
He's one of my favorite content creators. He's an etymologist, and he actually has a book coming out soon called Algo Speak, and it's all about how social media is transforming the way that we talk.
Oh, wow.
And I'm such a fan of Adam's. We've talked about sort of collaborating for a while. He made a video recently on an article that I wrote about emoji, and then he wrote a guest piece for my newsletter last week. So I definitely want to do more of that, like people that I think they're really interesting, or like we have sort of adjacent audiences. Yeah.
And you can help kind of, I mean, one thing I like about Substack, and again, I want to talk to you about Substack for a sec, but is that you can, it gives you the ability to help promote other people's Substacks in a kind of effective way, and it actually works. Like, I think I told you at this party, like Rob Henderson, who I think you're familiar with his work, right? He like posted one or just suggested one of my articles, and that actually did lead to a huge increase in subscribers to my Substack. Like that, like I bet if the New York Times wrote about Substack, which they won't because I don't write enough I don't contribute that often to my Substack, so there'd be no reason to. It's also not very good, but like it would probably lead to, but like the actual like Substacker were suggesting your Substack, like that actually helps
so much. I mean, I saw this with my book. Like my book came out last year and got the most positive review in the New York Times that I think anyone has ever got. Like, it was so insane. I honestly thought I was being punked. I was like refreshing the page. I was like,
you're like, is this real?
This is insane. And they also picked my book as like one of the best books of the fall. Like it was like on this list, and I was so excited, and it was so cool to get that recognition. But I have to tell you, it did not lead to any sales. And then I would go on like these random podcasts, or like I went on the Vergecast actually, and like sold thousands of books because people just have like a relationship with the newsletter writers that they read or the podcasters. It's kind of like, honestly, again, what happened this election, but it's just like you see these little like glimpses. I think if you're promoting something or if you're in the media and someone links to you and you're like, oh shoot, like this is like the link from the right Substack can really
mean, it's kind of, I find the only way that I've ever been able to promote this podcast effectively is to be on other people's podcasts that have similar kind of audiences, right? Everything else doesn't work. Facebook advertising, I've tried everything. Instagram. Also, my name of my podcast sucks because it kind of makes you think that it's just a podcast about writing, but that's like a marketing thing. User Mag is much better because it's like, it's more open. Right about now, I can only interview, people think it's a writing podcast, and it's totally,
you got to rebrand.
Bad. I got to rebrand, right? So the New Yorker, I just want to ask about that piece. That was I thought generally a good positive piece.
Oh my God, it was so positive.
Are
you kidding?
To be like profiled in the New Yorker, that's kind of like, if I was profiled in the New Yorker, my parents, I think they would be like, we're done. Thank you. My son is in that's
I don't
to
know
them.
if my mom cared.
Oh my God, are you kidding? We have to trade parents. My parents would be so thrilled. I can't even imagine.
My mom is actually like very, very in the media. Like my mom like reads a lot and knows a lot. I think my parents just like, I don't know how much of my own stuff they see. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my mom for years didn't even understand that Break was, like, she thought break.com was a part of YouTube. Like, she was so confused.
My mom is on Blue Sky. My mom is plugged
awesome.
in.
Your mom's hip. Your mom's hip. I just joined Blue Sky. I mean, I'm new to Blue Sky. But did the New Yorker article lead to, like, I'm curious, did that help in traffic to your
No,
not really.
It's
just
got
bragging
like
rights.
Traffic, but it was cool. I mean, I was glad about that coverage because it kind of set the record straight about, like, again, a lot of people just like taking like Fox News, like everything I do is framed through the lens of controversy, and it's just very frustrating. And I have had to deal with this all the time, like my book, my everything.
Why do you think that is? I mean,
I know why it is.
Well, because you have. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a very dedicated, I mean, I have people like, I write about online influence. It's something that the far right, again, has aggressively tried to capture. And I cover extremists. Like I cover a lot of right-wing extremists, obviously very famously libs of TikTok. I like revealed her identity, but I've also covered Milo Yiannopoulos, like literally throughout the past decade, I've just covered all of sort of the worst people on the internet and like their quests to amass online attention. And so I've just become the target of like, I mean, especially back a couple years ago when Tucker Carlson was on the air, like he was just doing segments about me constantly, and Fox News writes about me constantly, and the New York Post as well. Like it's just they know that they can sort of paint me in this certain way and get outrage clicks, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, that would make me crazy. I think you're pretty brave. I mean, I wouldn't want to, not that I'm scared of those people. Maybe I am. I don't know. Maybe they're dangerous, but just to like that constant hate, like having to deal with that a lot. Like,
but it's like,
way.
it's not even that. It's like, I mean, yes, it's the hate, but it's like somebody hired this right-wing comms firm to like seed crazy stories about me. People have bought shit tons of traffic to like all of these articles smearing me so that they rank higher than my own website. There's tons of websites just dedicated to information, posting information about me. Somebody was hiring people on Craigslist to follow me around and take pictures of me in my neighborhood multiple times. Like,
why do you think they've made you such a target?
Because I think the right recognizes very well that online influence is the most sort of powerful form of currency in our world today. I don't know another reporter at my scale that's covering their world at all.
Right.
Honestly.
And you're not afraid to cover it? Or
no, I don't care about drama. So I'm like, fuck you.
Do you ever fear for your life? I think some people think, oh, those people on the right are freaking crazy. They'll come and show up, you know, like Pizzagate, and show up and like with a gun and shoot you or whatever. Like, do you get scared about that stuff?
You know, I think they're such chickens. Like I've confronted so many of them over the years that I think they just chicken out. Like, and I've had things like at VidCon a couple years ago, like these Twitch streamers were making threats, like violent threats, and I had to be like escorted out by all these people in front of me. And I've had like physical, I mean, I was assaulted on the job, kind of famously at Charlottesville. Like, so like there's like, I've definitely had instances, but I just think most of them are cowards. And I'm like,
yeah, you don't have
they're not coming to LA. Like, I mean, some of them have come to LA, but it's like, good luck. Like they come in the real world. Like during my book tour, I had a couple of them sort of show up or try to heckle or whatever. And it's like, but then once they're off the internet, they don't really know how to like behave, you know?
Yeah. Right. They're not.
Because everyone's like, shut up. What are you doing?
So for those who might not, I mean, I don't want to tell all the different things that you've done, but who are the people that are coming and heckling?
It's just right-winger. It's mostly fans of these right-wing people.
Right.
So it's like fans of, you know, fascists, basically. Like,
yeah.
you know,
right.
people that organize the Unite the Right rally are like fans of people like Higher I Check or Elon Musk, who I've also had drama with. Like, you know, just fans of these radicalized figures that I've reported critically on, and they feel like.
And it's always on the right. Do you ever report critically on people on the far left?
Yeah, if they were doing something. I mean,
right.
Like I can't think of a good example. Like the far left has zero political power or influence in this country in any
right.
capacity, whereas the far right it just won the presidency again. So
yeah,
there's the
it's interesting. The far left has a lot of influence over the elites, but they don't necessarily have influence over.
I don't think they have influence over the elites at all. The elites, the far left, like the people that want communism, like they're not represented in any elite circles.
Right. I'm thinking about maybe like trans movement, or like I'm thinking about like certain.
I don't consider the trans movement far left.
Okay.
I guess to me,
obviously there's extremes of any movement. Like there were some on the far right that would consider certain beliefs of people on the trans movement to be far left, right?
They also consider women's rights to be far left. They also consider bodily autonomy to be far left. I mean, they say that all the time. My opinion, especially regarding trans people, because I do cover trans issues a lot, and I've covered a lot of trans influencers and stuff, is like they deserve complete human rights, just the way they have the right to bodily autonomy. They should have the right to live the way that they want to live and have access.
100% agree with you on that.
Healthcare. So
do you think the right is? Yeah. Can I tell you a thing? And it's interesting. So I was speaking. Do you think the right has painted you in an unfair way about the trans issue? Because like one time I was telling somebody I was interviewing, and somebody said, "Oh, Taylor Lorenz, she's transphobic," and I was like,
That's insane. And no person that's ever dealt with me would ever say that, because I have no, like,
It's
that
crazy.
is just a crazy statement,
know, it's
because
You're the opposite.
I'm very much the opposite. That is like a huge reason why they hate me and I know I have complete solidarity with trans people.
All right.
150%.
So you heard it here, whoever fucking said that to me. I don't even
I
know.
think maybe they got confused with the people that I'm against, like people like Hire I Check or something. Like,
Yeah, maybe that.
maybe she thinks I'm that person
You're
or
that
something.
person. Yeah, I was really surprised. It's like I really like. There's no research that has indicated that, and anything you've ever read would be the opposite.
No,
of
I
that.
mean, I care a lot about gender equality, and I think it's crucial. And I think trans people are such a, like, if you care, especially as a woman, if you care about misogyny at all, which is like rampant online and I write a lot about, like, trans people are such a like canary in the coal mine for that type of stuff, because especially with these laws around, like, you know, what someone can wear, what kind of bathroom somebody has to use. You know, it's just like what they're doing is policing, it's sort of just policing gender roles and policing how people can dress and express themselves. And
Right.
I don't agree with any of that.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let me ask a question about where you hope User Mag goes. Like, what is your dream in 5 years? Like, do you look at like something like the Free Press and be like, I'd love to run something like, not necessarily like the
I
politics
had
of the Free
tens
Press?
of billion. I mean, she has tens of millions of dollars like given to her by
Investment.
billionaires. So like I would, yeah, if somebody wanted to give me millions and millions of dollars, I could definitely make a version of the Free Press.
But is that the idea, is that you have like this, basically a media company that you're running, you're the center of it as a sort of personality, like Barry Weiss is sort of the center of it, but she doesn't do everything for Free Press, right? She's got like people who now, like, she doesn't even like host her.
Well, she's just sort of like a propaganda front. Like, I've written about
Yeah.
this before, but like she's not really independent media, because she's just backed by the same billionaires that, like, the same tech billionaires that control everything else. Like, she's not out there, like, you know, she's funded by a bunch of rich people. And I wrote about this recently because I talked about the difference between the content creator ecosystem on the right versus the left, and how if you're on the right, like if I was to get my microphone and start saying a bunch of right-wing stuff, people would be giving me money.
Yeah.
There's organizations, there's an entire infrastructure for funding. I think if you're trying to start a sustainable independent media company and you're not far right or extreme, it's a little bit harder and you can't scale that way. So I'm much more inspired by people like Casey Newton or Ryan Broderick, who are both also tech reporters, but like have kind of built their own little media companies.
Yeah.
But
That's
aren't
cool.
like, you know, they don't have like 20 people working for them, but they might be able to hire an editor now and then, or like have like 1 or 2 people working for them. Like I don't like managing people. I'm not trying to like build a newsroom. Like I really just want to be like a content creator and
Yeah.
journalist and just be self-sustainable.
Yeah, self-sustainable, and yeah, be able to make money doing this, doing what you love and what you're passionate about, but not having to be accountable to somebody whose politics or, you know, whatever philosophy you don't subscribe to. I get it, right? I mean, can we talk about the election before I let you go? Because, I mean, I feel like this was kind of like the social media election. This was this is all the stuff you've written about and kind of been warning about kind of came like to roost here, right? I mean, it feels like they weren't listening to you. Why did they not listen to you?
No, you know what's so crazy? The week before the election, I published this piece that was like long form versus short form. And it was this guy, Brendan Gaughan, who actually has done consulting for like Obama in the past, but he's just like a creator economy expert. He was like, he really like read the tea leaves, because he was like, I think Trump could win because he's doing all of this long form, deep parasocial content, and Kamala is completely focused on short form and not building any kind of deeper relationship with people online. And I was like, you know what? I think you're kind of right. And I wrote it up, but I couched it enough to be like, this is what Brendan thinks.
Right.
Maybe it's true. And he was really 100% right. So he deserves all the credit for that blog post.
So to understand what you mean by that, you mean like Trump was going on Rogan and talking for 3 hours when she was doing like 10-minute appearances on The View, right?
Yeah,
like,
if that. And it was totally scripted. Like the Call Her Daddy interview, it was not the normal Call Her Daddy format, and it was all scripted, and she could only talk about one issue. And so she wasn't.
Seem to be so scared to really say what's on their mind. Like, you know, I don't know what that's all about.
Well, I think a huge part of it, and I wrote about this, is that their policies are not widely popular. They have completely reoriented the party around what a bunch of rich donors want, and they're not speaking a populist message that appeals to people. They're not acknowledging people's problems. Like they're not,
Right.
speaking that language. And so I think when they can't speak to that stuff and then they have to go into these spaces, and
Right.
online spaces are more progressive than the Democratic Party. Any online space on the left that has any modicum of clout is further left than the Democratic Party.
I mean, what happened? When did the Republican Party suddenly become like the punk rock party of like it's like crazy. Like I don't know how we let this, and I will admit that I am a Democrat, so like I mean I don't think anybody's surprised here, but like how did this happen? That like the punks, like the people who are like disrupting and like who are doing it right online, like kind of like have the ears of like younger people are the Republicans. It's insane. Like
But
I don't
that's
know
because
how.
the Democrats they're obsessed with upholding the status quo and like the legacy mainstream media and like legacy systems. Like the right has always, I think because the right has always, like, if you talk to them, they'll always say like, well, the Democrats have the mainstream media. We could never have never mind that like the Wall Street Journal, I would argue, like constantly amplifies Republicans. The New York Times constantly amplifies Republicans. But it is sort of true that the mainstream media tends to maybe have been more Democratic in the past couple decades. I don't know. But the right leaned into personality driven media and online media very early. Even from the days of talk radio, it was very like personality driven, and they recognized the value of online influence very early too. And so they began investing like over a decade ago in the influencer world.
Right. An opinion, like even like before the internet, there was AM radio, right? Like the Rush Limbaugh like era. And it was kind of like an early example of like, internet kind of like, influencer. I mean, Rush Limbaugh's like an influencer like back in the day, like,
Yeah.
and yeah, like the Democrats were always, I remember they started this thing when I first got to LA, there used to be this thing called Air America that was like
Oh,
sort
yeah.
of like, remember, like it was like the answer to Rush Limbaugh. It was like, and like, yeah, like Rachel Maddow actually started on Air America. I think it was one of her first things,
Yeah.
but like, yeah, they didn't do it right. It was never like good. Like I wanted it to be good because I wanted to be like, oh yeah, now we got the Rush Limbaugh. The only thing we seem to be good at is comedy, like satire. We're good at that.
Well, a lot more
Right?
like comedians are very like right leaning these days.
Really? Because I mean, yeah, I guess. I mean, like
I'm just thinking of the big podcast ones. I'm not a
Okay, the
huge comedy
podcasty ones.
person, so I'm only thinking of like Theo Vaughn and like I guess Rogan is technically a comedian and
right.
Shane
Okay,
Gillis.
that's interesting because I feel like I worked when I worked at Stuff Magazine, Greg Gutfeld was my boss.
Oh my God, no way.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
And-
one of my I'm fascinated by this man.
Oh, really? Oh, like we could talk. I probably shouldn't do this publicly, but we can turn off the stop. I mean, I know Greg very well because I mean he was my boss for a year. But Greg was interesting because this was like I'm dating myself now, but so I was working for Greg during when 9/11 happened, and he was like at that time to have somebody like a Greg Gutfeld in your like there was nobody that had the same political views as Greg Gutfeld, like
Yeah.
nobody that he worked with, right? Like I had never even met that many people like him. Like in New York, you don't meet people like Greg. You don't meet like Fox wasn't even really a thing yet. It was a thing, but he wasn't really on it yet. He was making some guest appearances. But like his first instinct after 9/11, like literally like taking the subway like 1 mile an hour through the gray, I remember tunnels, like the soot, like all over everything. It was horrible. We had to actually go to work like 2 days after 9/11. And his first instinct was, we've got to get Brooke Burke on our cover in a flag bikini, like she's got to be wearing like a American flag bikini. Like he kind of like he was like the Make America Great Again, like really early on. Like he
Yeah.
got it. It was all about flag. It was all about America, and like we were like, what the fuck are you talking about? He was right. I mean, it's so like crazy, and it was like that was like his thing. Like he was. So anyway, that was actually I mean, it was hard. This was like a career like sort of like a wake up call in my career where I was kind of like 2 days after 9/11, I'm like on the phone to Brooke Burke's publicist, like, yeah, so we need her in a bikini. I mean, it was like, what am I doing with my life kind of moment, like, right? I mean, I quit like 3 months later, but But it was just like, yeah. So anyway, so I forgot where I was going with that. Greg Gutfeld.
Well, it's just such a different media climate, like
Yeah.
you're saying. Like I think these people have been able, especially on the right, like they've just been able to amass a lot of influence through alternative media. And the
Right,
Democrats
and I feel the
have
left is not as good
shunned
at
it.
that. Yeah, they
They-
shunned it. They're scared of it. I think they're scared of, I don't know, because you have to take a real strong opinion, I feel like, to be successful.
But like they also kill anybody that's like successful in that area. Like Bernie crushed it on the internet constantly. Like he was literally on Rogan in 2019. How did the Democrats react? They like chastised him for going on it.
Right.
You know, so it's like
Do you think that Kamala should have gone on Rogan? For sure, right?
yeah, but I think she would have bombed it because she had nothing to say. Like fundamentally her policies weren't popular. And I think this goes back to the broader problem, which is like they don't speak to the people. Like they're out for their rich donors. They're not out speaking any sort of populist messages. They're not talking about things that are resonating with young people. And their policies are kind of out of touch. Like they've just really become the party of the sort of like elites, for lack of a better word. Or at least that's the perception. And you know, it's allowed the Republicans to falsely promote themselves as like men of the people when they're literally way more for billionaires than anyone else.
I know, that's the irony of all this is that like all the things that people voted them in for seem to be all the things that they really actually stand for.
I know.
It's pretty depressing. How are you reacting to this? I mean, did you have trouble getting up the next day, or were you kind of like,
no, I
you
mean,
kind of saw it coming and you were just like, fuck it.
They did it to themselves. Like they lost this. She could have won, but again, it's like they chose to alienate their own party. I was at the DNC. I saw what happened with the members of the uncommitted movement. I saw the way that they treated so many groups. I mean, they didn't want to build a coalition. They took this stance of shut up and vote for me. You better hold your nose and vote for us because we're not Trump. And that's just not a winning strategy.
Who are the people they shunned that you feel like they shouldn't have shunned?
Well, the uncommitted movement.
What's the uncommitted movement again?
The Democrats. They were Democrats, Democratic delegates that wanted to speak at the DNC. They just wanted like a series of very, very minor sort of surface level concessions related to the war and sort of like stopping the violence in the Middle East and barely wanted very much. Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a really wonderful piece about sort of what happened. And they just, they sent Bill Clinton out to Michigan to talk about how like, to say a bunch of stuff. Like, I just think they were very out of touch with their messaging. And I mean, I wrote about this actually when Biden was the candidate still, but do you remember in 2020, there was this thing called TikTok for Biden that was this coalition of some of the biggest.
Remember, explain it to us.
So it was called TikTok for Biden in 2020, and it was a coalition of some of the biggest content creators on TikTok and hundreds of the biggest Gen Z content creators. Huge amount of political, tens of millions of followers between them, and also just a huge amount of influence and sway over Gen Z. They formed this thing called TikTok for Biden, where they were like, you know what, Trump has been in charge for our formative years. This is horrible. This is our first election we can vote in. We need to come together and just get him out. We don't like Joe Biden. They all wanted Bernie, but whatever, let's just get rid of Trump. And Biden has promised to concede and do all this stuff, or give some concessions. Right. And what happened when Biden got in office? By the way, Biden thanked that group, said that they were instrumental in turning out the youth vote. Then he gets into office, basically says fuck you to all of them, completely blacklisted most of them. Actively ostracized these people with millions and millions of followers that have a huge amount of sway in Gen Z. Over the dumbest stuff, over climate, over Gaza, over, disagreements that a good politician would be like, okay, look, these are policy positions that are overwhelmingly popular among people under the age of 30. Maybe I can't concede on all of them because I do have to appeal to a wide group, but whatever. Instead, it was this energy, and I wrote about this for the Washington Post. It was like, oh, you're not 100% going to boost us? Mm-hmm. Well, fuck you. Get on board. You have to get on board. What do you want, Trump? And I think a lot of those kids I talked to them. They didn't stay home, or they didn't post. They stayed home, or they didn't post about the election at all.
Right. Yeah, I think there's this feeling, and this is just anecdotal. I have no evidence of this, that oh, these people aren't going to vote anyway, so we don't really need to like cater to them. Like we're going to cater to people like, you know, our core whatever based Democrats, and they don't seem to have that much interest either. You know, the media doesn't have that much interest in the sort of TikTok generation, but neither does like the political class or the elite class. And I guess they did it. It's at their own peril because, I mean, I feel like the right killed us in that. I mean, it's just
They
unbelievable.
absolutely. Trump is going on Aiden Ross. Like they care about that next generation.
Right.
And we
it's
should
amazing
care.
that they knew about that. They know, I mean, obviously, I don't know if Trump knows about that stuff, but people around him certainly know enough about it to know what shows he should be on. Right. And,
Yeah. I think
yeah. And so do you think the next time around we've got to, I mean, have a candidate that is willing to kind of like, I mean, look, back in the day, Bill Clinton went on like, you know, like Arsenio Hall show. I mean, that was what you did back then, right? Like, so now like it's the new media, like it's not about going on the Today Show or on like the Tonight Show or these old kind of legacy shows. It's about interacting with influencers like of today's new media.
But they
right?
need to actually put candidates that are popular. And
Yeah.
you can't just keep, this is the third election cycle where you've told young people, shut the fuck up and just vote for this
Person that we
neoliberal
don't
politician that you don't agree with because you don't want to have the big scary Trump person. And it's like, yes, Trump is like, I consider him a huge threat to democracy, like
Right,
definitely
right.
should not be president. But like, I understand these people that are like struggling or they're like, what has
Yeah.
she done
Well,
for me?
Because
Like
I have my
you know.
kids. Yeah, I mean, my kids. Well, one son is 19, but my daughter's 14. I don't think they've never had they didn't have an Obama. Like they've never had a president that is like somebody that could inspire them. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They've just been grown up with like Biden and Trump. I mean, it's depressing. And
It is
I'm you know a lot of the. So what is there anybody that TikTokers are excited about? Like on the Democratic side, like do they talk about people? Because like I feel like it's almost like we have to like get rid of the whole cast of characters and just bring in some new people.
I'm hoping that I mean, I would have thought that they learned this lesson in 2016 and they adamantly refused to learn this lesson. And it is very concerning that a lot of the pundits in the weeks following the election have spent their time, frankly, blaming trans people and blaming the most marginalized people, being like, we went too woke. It's like, you guys didn't go, what are you talking about? You were talking about putting Republicans in your cabinet. You can't claim that Republicans are like this unique evil and then also you're going to have work with them all like closely and put them in your cabinet. Like it doesn't make any sense. And so, yeah, I don't know. I hope that they learn that that this stupid strategy that they've been employing for 3 cycles is just not working anymore and they need
Right.
popular candidates and like they should stop trying to like force candidates that are not popular.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see who's popular, like who. Yeah, I don't even know if we know who that person is. I don't know if we
I
know
don't know
who
if
the
we
next
do
Obama.
either. They had Pete Buttigieg out on Jubilee, like, doing his debates and stuff. And that was
I like
interesting.
Pete Buttigieg, but everybody's like, well, we'll never elect a gay. I don't know if that's even true. I like him, and at least he's not afraid to talk.
He's a very good debater.
He's a good debater, and he's not afraid to go on like Fox, and he's not afraid to talk to the right and be. And he would have gone on Rogan for 3 hours and probably would have been interesting because he's got an interesting story.
I would love to see him on Rogan, actually.
Yeah.
Because he is very good at sort of like dismantling.
He just seems real. I think part of it is what you and I get frustrated with is nobody seems real. Like she seemed very scripted and,
I think she was just scared. They were telling her like not to like
be herself.
Yeah, I just think it's hard.
But I wasn't sure who she was because she was one person in 2020 and then she was another person in 24. So it was a hard one.
Yeah. But it'll definitely, I do think it's solidified. I've heard from a lot of people that like there's a lot of interest in trying to understand the sort of newer media climate. So I do think that there's.
Well, that bodes well for User Mag because you're like they have to, they'll do interviews with you. And so I'm excited about your future.
Stay tuned for my 2028 endorsement.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, Taylor, you have not disappointed. You were. I don't agree with everything you say, but I respect everything you say. You're probably a little further to the left than I am, but you're also younger than I am. So we get more conservative as we get older. But you're awesome, and I really admire you, and I think that you're just somebody that people can really look up to as kind of like a model of how to do your career right.
Thank you. That means a lot.
So it's User Mag. I mean, if people want to like find out more about you, what are the best places to kind of follow you?
Yeah, definitely. It's usermag.co. I could not afford the .com, which was thousands of dollars.
That's amazing.
So it's .co.
Well, maybe eventually you'll be able to buy the .com.
One
because-
day when I
yeah.
really make it. I know. I was just like, it was like $6,000 or something, and I was like, no, that's like 4 months rent. But yeah,
I
it's
spent
user.
$4,000 for screenjunkies.com. But anyway.
Oh, damn. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good
Okay.
name though. Yeah, usermag.co. I'm also on YouTube, just at Taylor Lorenz. I have a weekly podcast called Power User, that comes out on my YouTube channel and my TikTok and my Instagram. So,
All right. Well, always really entertaining and informative following you. So I will continue to do so. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you
this
so much for having
spirited
me.
conversation. Yes. All right. Thank you. All right. I'm going to press stop. Let me just make sure